All right, how's it going, y'all? So today we're going to be talking about the 3 key reasons why your Synology NAS is slow for remote connections and how to solve them. So this is not for local connections, people who are in the same office, same building as the NAS. This is all about remote connections. So this could be somebody from the coffee shop down the street or somebody accessing it from across the world. This is going to cover all of those cases and talk about why it's slow and how to speed it up. And hint, it has nothing to do with upgrading to 10 gigabit networking. That's not going to do anything here because there's a completely different bottleneck that we're going to be talking about. All right, so first, before we get started on this video, let's talk about what a remote connection is. A remote connection is anybody who is accessing files, downloading files, whatever, who is not in the same local area network as the NAS. These are people who are not in the same building, the same Wi-Fi network, whatever. That is what I'm talking about when I say a remote connection. Remote means that they are not in the same local area network, and that means that all the performance issues are completely different, and as well as their optimizations, because it's essentially a whole different equation. And these performance issues are pretty much unanimously solved by software, not hardware. A lot of people will go spend a bunch of money on SSD caching, 10 gig networking, more hard drive, more powerful units, trying to get faster remote connections, and it's not going to do anything at all for the most part. When in reality, there are a few things here that are quite frankly physics limitations, protocol limitations, and other things that really do not have anything to do with the actual hardware. Though obviously you've got very, very, very slow hardware that's hardly able to keep up, it will kind of lead into that. But for the vast majority of people, the issues are in the software and the configuration rather than the hardware. Besides increasing the speed of your NAS, are you interested in other ways of increasing the productivity and security of your business? If so, I'm excited to announce the sponsor of today's video, Nordpass. Nordpass offers an easy-to-use password manager that allows you to securely store critical information for your business. And it allows you to store more than just passwords and logins. You can store credit card information and other secure notes. You can then also share this information with specific users on your team, ensuring that only people who need access to stuff have it. This can also be a huge productivity booster because it reduces out the time your employees spend filling out forms, typing in addresses and payment information, and resetting forgotten passwords. Nordpass also has breach monitoring, which provides peace of mind by alerting you if any of your information has been part of a breach. With my consulting clients, I often create admin accounts to work on their systems. I love that Nordpass can automatically generate strong, unique passwords for each system and store them all securely. Then Nordpass also allows me to securely share this information either with users on my team or even back to the clients themselves with a secure link. It's easy to set up Nordpass and onboard your team. Secure your business effortlessly with a 3-month trial of Nordpass today. Use activation code SpaceRex at nordpass.com/SpaceRex. This is a limited time offer. Thanks to Nordpass for sponsoring today's video. Now back to the tutorial. And starting off right off the bat is actually something that's right in front of us right now, is this right here. This is by far the most common way that people access their NAS remotely, Quickconnect. It is an easy place to get started, and it works without doing much configuration. But the critical thing that we see right here is this .us5. That right there is why your file system is slow and why it takes a long time to download files. So right now, if you look, everything takes a little while. Every click, everything takes a little while to run. If I go in and I just try to download a single raw file, a 35 megabyte file, we're going to see it is slow. We're talking kilobytes per second. We are not even getting 1 megabyte per second, and that is why it's so slow. What this is right here is what's called a Quickconnect relay server. So Quickconnect has a few different ways that they can operate. It actually just kind of senses the network configuration and it does its best to figure out the best way to connect on in. So right now, if Quickconnect determines that it cannot get a direct connection to the NAS, what it's going to do is it's going to set up what's called a relay server. So what a relay server is basically your data first going through a Synology server to get to you. And the reason why it has to do this is the entire internet and all protocol is built on this client-server setup, where there's a client that reaches out to a server to establish a connection. That server has to allow external connections in directly from the client. Otherwise, nothing works. That's how the internet is set up, and all protocols on the internet are set up. So this is totally fine for hosting a website or anything like that, because you have a public IP address that the website just grabs, and it just takes that in. And when you go to www.spacerex.co, you literally are hitting my web server that I have ports 80 and 443 open on. And so you literally talk directly to my web server. When you do a dig on www.spacerex.co, you'll find the public IP address of my AWS virtual machine that runs my website. That is how the internet is designed to work. You have the server that has a public connection that's allowed into it, and that is how it's set up. Now, while that works great for a public web server that has a public IP address assigned to it, it doesn't really work at a home router level, because this NAS does not have a public IP address. If we look at its network, it has what's called a private IP address, a local IP address. And so if you were to try to type in your browser 10.30.0.107, you can't get there, because this is a private IP address. It's an IP address behind my router. And so there's no way for it to just take incoming connections on in. So that's actually where Quickconnect comes in. The Quickconnect relay servers will kick in at this time, because it'll say, hey, I can't directly access the server. And so what'll happen is the Quickconnect relay server will basically act as a middleman. It'll accept connections from both the Synology and the actual web client, my computer in this case, and essentially act as a bridge in between them. So the Synology will reach out to it, and my computer will reach out to the same server, and they'll talk like that. It's essentially duct taping them together and allowing them to talk without using port forwarding. Now the problem is, Synology has to pay for this. Synology has to pay for this in perpetuity when you've only bought the NAS once. And so because of that, they're going to throttle them down to very slow. And so it's usable from a photo sharing perspective, where you just need to download a few hundred megabytes of files maybe. And if it takes a couple minutes, that's okay. But once you start actually using a real workflow with this, it can be very, very, very slow. And so that is the primary reason why in 90% of cases where clients reach out to me and say, hey, the NAS is very slow externally, that right there is what solves it, because they're using this relay server. If you go to your Quickconnect and you see a .direct.quickconnect.2, that means that it's got a direct connection, and that is not the issue for you. But in most cases, this right there is the issue. We're going to talk about the different options you've got in the second part of this video. So the Quickconnect relay servers are by far the most common reason why an external access to your NAS is slow. All right, so let's say that this is not the case, where somebody externally connecting on in, they see the .direct.quickconnect.2, therefore they know it's direct connection, and it's still really, really, really slow. It might be slow for them to download files from the NAS, but pretty fast for them to upload files to it. That's pretty common, and that right there is probably caused by your internet speed. So, at least in the United States and in most places, internet speed is often marketed as download speeds. It's all about your download speeds. When you look at a lot of places that don't have fiber, you hardly can even tell what the upload speeds are a lot of the time. So for example, at my place, I've got coax and I have the most expensive plan possible. I've got like 800 down, but only 35 up. And once you start having a server and a Synology at your house, your upload speed becomes very, very, very critical. So the easiest way to figure out what's going on is to simply go into a speedtest.net. And then what we're going to do is we're going to hit go and look at specifically your upload speed most of the time. So right now, to make sure that I can get the relay server, I'm actually using iCloud Prior Relay, so my speeds are a little bit slower than they normally would be, but the upload speed is pretty much that. So right here, this is my upload speed. And if I divide that by 8, so this is measured in megabits per second. If I divide that by 8, I'll get megabytes per second, which is what most people use. So I would estimate this to be about 4 megabytes max per second of upload speed. And upload speed here matters, where if somebody's downloading a file from my NAS, What I am doing is my NAS is uploading it to them. So whenever somebody's downloading, your office's or home's upload speed is what is the limiting factor, and vice versa. If they are uploading to you, your download speeds matter. And so essentially what will happen is whoever's got the slower upload/download speed, depending on the configuration, will often be the bottleneck in that configuration if you have a direct connection to the NAS. So that right there is a very common thing where you will see great performance when you're uploading files to it, but horrible downloads. And that right there is the reason why. All right, so now let's say that you've got great fiber, and that's also the great thing. Fiber is generally symmetric. That means your upload and your download speeds are probably going to be identical, and that is a huge thing. Anything over 500 up is going to be fast enough to do pretty much anything under the sun, and you'll actually end up with other performance issues. We'll talk about that at the second part of this video though. Finally, number 3, at least for this list, is going to be latency. And this one's the hardest one to talk about and kind of figure out, because you'll find that the people who are in the United States, maybe a few miles from you, have zero issues whatsoever. But then maybe you're in San Francisco and the people in New York are having some trouble. It's not great, it's usable but not great, and it's not a great experience, but they can get by. But then you talk to the people who are in the UK and around the world, and they can't use it at all. One thing when you're running your own server is latency. Latency is directly tied to how far apart two computers are. So if I am hosting a server here in the United States and somebody in Hong Kong wants to download a file from it, it has a lot of distance travel, and data can only flow at the speed of light through a cable. So what ends up happening is there is true physical latency between the two devices that can really set this. And this is something that's very hard to overcome, and is why something like Cloudflare exists and makes a lot of money. Because getting files to people who are geographically very, very, very far from your server is a tough thing to do. We're going to talk about that later, but this is by far the most complicated thing to work on, and specific protocols also have the biggest trouble. All right, so those are the 3 biggest reasons why your remote connections are slow. Now, in the next part of this video, we're going to be talking about how to speed up those remote connections. All right, so now our first one, and by far most common solution and fix, is that direct.quickconnect.2, or in this case, the .us5, which means we're currently running a relay server. The easiest way to solve this is to just open up the ports on your router. Open up 3 ports, 5000, 5001, and 6690 if you're using Synology Drive Share Sync. Port forward those 3 ports from your router to the Synology. Now, this has a security implication to it because now those ports are open and anybody can start hitting your server. Synology has pretty good security, but one day they could discover that there's a massive flaw in that security and it's not been patched in years or something like that. And so there is a real security implication to that. For me, I use it because I've got a lot of workflows that I use it for, and I tend to trust Synology's security quite well, but it is definitely something to think about. So that's the easiest way of solving it. And the easiest way to tell that it's worked is to just simply grab your phone, take it off Wi-Fi, and try to go to your Quickconnect. Sometimes you may have to quit your browser or open a private browser to get the direct connection to work. And go and see if you get the .direct.quickconnect.2. Because if you do, boom, you know it's set up and you know it's now working. And you have essentially solved that problem. Now that process of port forwarding is great if your ISP is giving you what's called a public IP address. Now, if you have something like Starlink or a newer ISP, a newer internet service provider that does not have millions of IP addresses to give out, you actually may be in a case where you've got what's called carrier grade NAT or CGNAT. The world is running out of IP4 addresses, unfortunately. Actually, I think it's completely ran out by now. So carrier grade NAT or CGNAT is basically like making a local network, but on a broader scale. So what your ISP does is they have 1 or a few hundred IP addresses that are public IP addresses that service you and all of your neighbors. So the easiest way to tell if this is occurring to you is to log into your router and see if the WAN IP address matches what you get when you look up what is my IPv4. If those match, you probably do not have carrier grade NAT, but if you look up and you've got like 100 dot something as your IPv4 within your router settings, there's a good chance you have carrier grade NAT. This can also be caused by actually having two routers. So it's very common you invest in something like a Aero mesh router setup where you've got your ISP's router that came with it that you don't ever really use, but it technically broadcasts Wi-Fi. And then you just plugged your Eros into it and it uses that. Well, unless you've set up that ISP router as actually having what's called pass-through mode or bridge mode, it's actually acting as carrier grade NAT, where you've actually got basically two different NATs there, and it can cause you a few different weird internet problems, but most commonly, port forwarding doesn't work. You have two options for that. You can either port forward from the ISP's router to the Eero, then to your local device, or you can actually just set up the ISP's router in bridge mode. That is how you can do port forwarding on that. Now, port forwarding is also required to run your own VPN server as well. So if you did want to go more secure than just opening up the ports broadly to the internet, and you just need your employees to be able to download the files, you can set up an open VPN server, and I will leave a link down in the description below to that tutorial as well. Now let's say you have carrier grade NAT, so you can't do the port forwarding, but you still need your employees to be able to download files faster. That is where Tailscale really comes in, and I will leave a link to that video as well, because Tailscale is a VPN that does not require any port forwarding to be done. And so all you have to do is sign up for Tailscale, and then you can actually link your NAS to that and use that. And so you can basically get much faster connections than Quickconnect, but without having to do any kind of port forwarding. So that is another option for people who do not want to port forward or cannot port forward and are getting that US 5 to whatever when they connect to their NAS. Finally, this is something I do not have a tutorial for yet, but I may also have one coming out in the future if people are interested. Say you are somebody who you need to be able to share files with people publicly, so basically anybody can access it, who you don't want to have something like a VPN server set up for them. You just want them to be able to access things, and you can't do port forwarding, and Quickconnect is too slow for you. You can use what's called a Cloudflare tunnel for that. I don't have a tutorial for this yet. I've deployed it a couple of times, but it can work, and it can work quite well. Essentially, you deploy a Cloudflare Docker container on your NAS and use that to get the faster speeds, and they can actually be very, very, very fast. I know I just ran through a bunch of different pieces there. There's just a lot of different options for speeding these things up, and I don't want to bog this video on down. And finally, one other thing that actually works for this and the next one that I sometimes will deploy for people who just no other way can get this to work because they don't have a public IP address and they have slow upload speeds and a bunch of other things, is to actually kind of offload this stuff from using the Synology to actually using something like Google Drive or Dropbox. So if you have a case where you really need to be able to share files out with people, but it's okay if you don't share them today, you can share them tomorrow, but you just don't want their download speeds to take a long time, and you've got slow upload speed, or you also just do not have the ability to do port forwarding or anything like that, a very common thing to do is set up Cloud Sync. So essentially Cloud Sync a specific folder on your NAS to Google Drive or Dropbox. Then let that upload overnight. You can shut your computer down, whatever, because the NAS is the one that's actually uploading all the files. Your computer is not. It offloads that. People can just copy files to that upload directory. Boom. Now they're in Dropbox. Then go ahead and just share it with a public Dropbox link. That way you can get around all the performance issues of having to upload from your own server. And for people who have not just one person downloading a specific file, but 50, this is huge because now you're offloading your responsibility of uploading to 50 different clients. So if you were to have 50 clients all downloading from your server, that's 50 connections. But if you were to upload that file to Dropbox first, your server only needs to upload that file once, and then Dropbox has to manage those 50 downloads. So that is very common and can be a way to also work if you've got slower upload speed, assuming you have the ability to kind of upload something overnight. If you do not, well, quite frankly, option 2, the only other solution is to call up your ISP, see if you can get fiber, and see if they will give you faster upload speeds. Unfortunately, there is no such thing as a magic bullet. If you have slow upload speeds, and there's no other way around getting people to download files, then you kind of just need to get faster upload speeds or move the NAS to somewhere that does. It is unfortunate that places that pay the exact same for internet that have the same download speeds can have literally a 50x performance difference in terms of their upload speeds when their download speeds are identical. It is a common issue. One final way around this, if you have slow upload speeds, is to actually use something like Parsec or Jump Cloud to not have to have those files ever be uploaded. So what you can do is you can actually have a computer at your office that actually has Parsec or Jump hooked up to it. And so instead of having remote employees download files to their computer, then work on them, really common with video editors, you can actually flip that on its head. They can actually just remote into a computer at the office, and then those massive files never have to be uploaded to their computers. This solution works especially with high latency connections, and it's really common for that. All right, so those are all some common seeds for different ways to solve problems. Uploading to Dropbox and Google Drive is a very common one I do because it actually can solve all three issues. You don't require port forwarding. You don't really need that much upload speed if you're okay with the first upload taking a while, but you don't want your client downloads to take a long time. And another advantage of Dropbox is they have content delivery networks all over the world, which means that it doesn't matter if somebody's downloading from India, the UK, or the United States, they all should be able to get a pretty fast download. It will be a little bit different depending on where they are, but not nearly the same as running it yourself. Finally, one other option for people who have remote employees all over the world, and that is to use Synology Drive. So if you're currently using SMB by VPNing in, that is a protocol that is incredibly latency sensitive. SMB over the internet is just very, very, very slow. It is designed to be over a local area network, and it's a very chatty program. So your remote employees, especially if they're far away, will notice that opening a large directory with a bunch of files in it can take seconds, really long enough where they're like, is this thing's broken? Just because every single one of those list operations is going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So that's a very common slowdown. One thing you can do instead is use something like Synology Drive to sync all these files with their local computers, meaning when they open a file, they don't have to open it from around the world, it's already on their local computer. This works really well with certain workflows, but in others it does not. So I know I've brushed over a lot of those, but I did really want to build up the core foundations for how to solve these problems because it's a lot more complicated than it is for a local area network. If your local area network speeds are slow, there's just a few things that you need to do to fix it, and you can make it fast. But if you're having trouble with a remote connection, there are so many different things you can do, and a lot of them are quite frankly outside of your control a lot of the time, and it's not like just buying more powerful, faster NAS will solve it in most cases. All right, well that's going to be it. If you want me to set this up for you, there's a Hire Me link down in the description below. And if you have any other questions, leave those down in the comments below. All right, have a good one. Bye.